Hi all, this is Silent Voice and this is the basics number 11, CIS, C-I-S, and it's responding to a video made by Benjamin A. Boyce called CIS is only a slur if you let it be. Now this is a response video, it's not a takedown video. I actually really like Benjamin Boyce's channel. I'm a subscriber and I follow the Evergreen series. I think there's quite a lot of value in that series. But anyway, he said a few things and I am going to respond to them.
What's been going on Twitter is that there's a lot of people complaining about the word cis, C-I-S.
So cis originates from chemistry and it has absolutely nothing to do with social identity at all. The wording that was appropriated from the chemistry usage is on the same side of. And so cis is meant to mean a person whose gender is on the same side as their biological sex. Now, I'm not sure how much that's changed since the definition of sex appears to have changed and gender replaces all.
You know, there's a certain ideological reason not to want cis to be assigned to you, and then there's a certain ideological reason for the desire to assign cis to people. I understand that, but a word is a word.
So very briefly, let's explore the word cis just a little bit more deeply than on the same side of. So it was placed on the privilege hierarchy, and I've got to say I don't much like the privilege hierarchy and what it's become, but I think that's the topic for a different video. The privilege hierarchy, they've said here, oh yep, trans is below cis. Now this avoids some really huge problems, one of which is orientation, gender nonconformity, and feminism. Feminists don't actually identify with gender roles assigned to the female sex. That's the reason that feminism exists. And gender nonconforming women are clearly not identifying with gender presentation assigned with, biological sex. And of course, lesbianism, by its very nature, is going against the roles assigned to women based on biological sex of being attracted to men, marrying a man, and sexually being available to men throughout life. So all of these women do not actually fit this idea of identifying with cis, and then to say that there is some privilege in this pretense is falsehood layered upon other falsehood. And that's not all that's actually a problem with cis, but I'm going to stop here and go back to listening to Benjamin Boyce.
So the first time that I encountered the word cis, it was at the Evergreen State College, if you can believe that.
Oh yeah, I can believe it. I really can believe it.
Then he started to really lay into what he called cis-normativity. And he kept on using the word cis. And in that word cis was this edge of intolerance. And it wasn't trauma. It wasn't somebody who was hurt, who was taking out his pain onto the world. It was somebody who was mean and an asshole and using that word to be mean and an asshole. And this was kind of at the beginning of my Evergreen trajectory. So I was kind of like, what are we doing? What are you guys doing? We did a lot of work. It took a lot of time for us to, develop tolerance for people.
This story is one where the speaker weaponized the use of the word cis, and there's many reasons to do that. Part of it is the oppression Olympics and getting, oppression points. Like, you guys are think you're normal, and there's all these poor marginalized people. Now, what that does is it rallies the troops, it draws people in, and it gives them something to fight against. And there's quite a lot of power in that. Now, as for it being an actual slur, I don't personally believe that the word in and of itself is a slur. I believe it can be used as one, which is a different understanding, and Benjamin goes into that just a little bit in a moment.
Because cis is a word that gender-critical individuals are, rallying against on Twitter. They're calling it a slur. They're calling it something that they don't want used or that frustrates them. And I understand that. I understand that. But it's like any slur. The more that you react to the slur, the more power the slur has.
I agree with this. I think there is absolutely no point at all getting on Twitter and arguing whether or not cis is a slur. I think you just simply say, I'm sorry, I don't use that word to describe myself, and move on. And the more that happens, the faster you can actually get to the guts of the conversation, why you're interacting with the person in the first place.
And there's no other word like the Nigge, soft A, or hard R word, and there's an E in there somewhere too. But that word was appropriated by the group that it was intended to demonize or derogatate, and so the power of that word shifted.
Personally, I can't see cis going down the same route as the racist N-word went down. I don't think it's ever really had the power of a slur like that. So, even when we had the Die Cis Scum t-shirts and, spray painting and all that stuff, it seems like that has already begun to die its own little death, yeah?
My contention against the word cis is allowing the people who use it as a slur to have that tool as a slur in their arsenal. Don't allow them to have that power over you. They use slurs. Slurs are particularly powerful when they derail conversation, or when they establish like a hierarchy, like the Nigge, soft A, hard R word, established a hierarchy of people who are valid, people who are invalid. The word cis, as opposed to trans, it will never actually establish that much of a hierarchy, and will only it will only be annoying. Like the worst it could possibly, the most power that cis could actually have is to be annoying.
His point about a hierarchy is really interesting. And when you look at the difference between race issues, where they were trying to point out a hierarchy that disadvantaged people of colour, when it comes to this cis word, what it's managed to do is flip the script. And women's voices are already being marginalised in our own movement and being told that they're not oppressed enough to be able to stand up and speak, and that they need to sit down and let more marginalised groups speak. So, the more that you have of these oppression points, the more speaking rights you get. And so trans becomes an oppression point, a speaking point, whereas cis becomes a shut up, you've got privilege, hierarchy, yeah? So it has already had that effect.
Even if it's really radically, popular to rally around trans rights, or the transgender ideology, or the transgender narrative, or the transgender identity, even if that's very popular, it's still only going to have a very small amount of permanence in the world.
On this point, I have to strongly disagree with the permanence and the impact of the word cisgender on culture and society. The word entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 2015, so that was 5 years ago. And as you can see here, it's mentioned in a very well-known online publication in Australia, The Conversation. Saskatoon City Councillors vote to draft bylaw on conversion therapy. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of conversion therapy, I think of a particularly egregious practice against homosexual people. So I think of orientation, not gender identity. Yet here you will see that gender identity has been attached to this legislation, and the word cisgender has been added into that legislation. It's not the only place this has happened. I'm just putting this one example in here to show that cisgender has become part of the common vernacular and is entering law. Next, we've got Sean Hayes, who was the guy who played Will on Will and Grace, on playing a cisgender woman in his new film, Lazy Susan, ... Okay, so the point of showing you this is that it has entered entertainment as well. The word cis was only really starting to be used regularly in activist circles around 8-9 years ago. Like, it has predated that, but seeing it on a regular basis on social media. We're looking at about 8-9 years ago, and in such a short period of time it's entered the dictionary, it's gone into law, into specific legal documents, and it's being used in entertainment.
Trans way of thinking, as a cult or as a movement, is going to burn itself out. It can't actually sustain itself because nature is going to take over. Nature is going to reassert the power of gender roles.
This was the one part of his video that I found a little on the disturbing side. Nature is going to assert the power of gender roles. I was hoping he'd sort of justify that or go into that as to what he believes these gender roles are that are natural. Because, you know, when you look from one culture to another, there really isn't any natural gender roles. There's natural biological sex roles, you know, like motherhood.
Like the dandies in the fin de siècle, or the long 19th century, 18th century, or whenever it was. The dandies, you know, back in the day, Oscar Wilde times and Charles Baudelaire times. Those guys were very effeminate. There's a long tradition of very effeminate men, or very fashionable men, men who want to spend a lot of time on their surface, on their pose, and on their inflection. That is a persistent, repetitive pattern of male behavior throughout all culture.
I'm not 100% certain where he's coming from with this. Is he saying that men's primping and preening is something that gets squashed over and over by gender roles? Or is he saying this desire to be, you know, typically effeminate is natural in men, and that is what will reassert itself and squash the idea of male cisgenderism?
Added to that dandyism is this whole civil rights sort of culture of fighting for rights and of asserting political power and getting into wrangly arguments on the internet. That stuff is now being used, like with the queer stuff. Queer simply means people who like the color pink now. Queer just means somebody likes neon colors now, and it's basically a fashion statement. It has no actual persistence in the world. It's the same as goth.
So while I completely agree with him on this idea of queer, it has no real nailed down meaning anymore, and so it really has become a meaningless, frivolous identity that mostly just means that the person doesn't want to be perceived as straight in society. They want to be perceived as different to other people in society, and that could be part of the oppression Olympics. It's hard to tell. I think it is a false equivalence to place queer and goth on the same level as the word cisgender, because, well, you don't have legislation protecting queer people, or nor do you have queer having an opposite for people who are not queer, or goth having an opposite for people who are not goth, and this has not been entered into legislature.
It's appropriated activist culture to give it more power than it actually deserves. The same with cis. The conversation in which cis actually means anything of actual intellectual rigor or actual intellectual value is in a non-derogatory context. So you only interact with the word in a non-derogatory context, and you're fine. You're good. It doesn't really matter. It will get under your skin, but if you allow somebody to get under your skin, you're handing them power.
While I do believe that it is possible for a person to call a woman cisgender with absolutely no ill intent at all in a non-derogatory fashion, just like it's possible for the word cisgender to be weaponized, like in the t-shirt Dice's scum, it's not actually possible for this to be a completely innocuous word because of the understanding of oppression and privilege and the fact that it's been placed on the privilege-oppression hierarchy. So you have men and women being called cisgender and being told they have privilege. This places men and women on an equal ground. Now, that is not actually true. The reason we have women's rights is because women don't have the same rights as men. The reason that we have feminism is because there is inequality between men and women. It's not possible to be both privileged and oppressed by your gender simultaneously. So while I 100% agree that we don't want to be passing power over on a silver platter and saying, here, please use this against us, I would also say that we don't want to get so relaxed that we ignore the power that already exists.
It's the same way with the fuck or shit. Like when a 2 or 3 year old discovers that they have a super amount of power, if they use the word fuck, because it sends all the adults into a frenzy, they're going to keep on using that word. And it's the adult's responsibility to apply pressure to the child in an indirect fashion so that they understand that appropriateness and inappropriateness is not really about, we police appropriate behavior in order for deeper conversations or more complex conversations to occur. That is the purpose of appropriate and inappropriate words, or designating certain sorts of concepts as inappropriate. But if you appropriate what is appropriate and non-appropriate and use that as a tool to denigrate your enemy or your tribe, or to rally your tribe around taking down a word, you're not going to be actually engaging in any sort of discourse that's actually going to persist beyond your tribe and beyond your tribe and the other tribe.
I completely agree with him here. To internet scream or capitalize, that's a slur, and then go on a rant or to have an ongoing argument is a complete waste of time. What you would really want to do is just state your reasons once clearly and move on. And do it calmly, because that's for the benefit of the lurkers reading it. It's not for the person you're talking to.
The best thing to do with a word that you don't like is to ignore it, or to understand that it does have a limited use and apply that limited use and only allow it to maintain that limited use, and otherwise just ignore it. There are people who will disagree with me, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. There are people who really think that the word cis is a very all-important word to defeat or to defend.
So the likelihood that Benjamin Boyce is going to come across this video is nearly nothing. So he's unlikely to actually hear any of the responses that I have to his commentary on this. But I personally believe that this has got nothing to do with liking or disliking a word, and everything to do with the longevity of women's rights and understanding what feminists are aiming to achieve and why it is of import.
And I think that both the hardcore defeatists and the hardcore defenders of the word cis are involved in an ideological scramble that actually is just it's another blip on the culture war. And it doesn't actually have any actual permanence with regards to how we understand the world and one another. It's a distraction. It's a petty battle, petty skirmish.
Arguing with people online, and it's just a distraction and waste of time, period. Finding that one person who sits on the opposite side of the debate or a different position in the debate that looks like they're capable of having a conversation and really getting into, going deep, diving deep. That is not a waste of time. And also, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that controlling the language and controlling the narrative means winning the argument. And it's actually the truth. If you look at any debate on any topic, look who defines the terms and who is directing the narrative, and that's the person who wins the debate. It's not always the person who is telling the most truth or being the most logical. Anyway, if you have enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and share, and let me know what you think in the comments section. Cheers.